On a quiet afternoon, the FBI dropped a piece of footage that changed everything about this case. Somewhere along a back road 60 miles south of Tucson, a car was pulled to the shoulder. A woman was behind the wheel. Her husband sat beside her. Within minutes, he was in the back of a patrol vehicle, answering questions about his name, his birthday, and his social security number, the kind of questions that follow you long after the night is over. Hours later, agents were inside his home under a federal warrant. His phone was taken. His garage door was pried open. And somewhere in that chaos, his own mother-in-law stood in front of television cameras and said something no family member should ever have to say about someone they love, that a photo shown to her by police, a masked figure caught on a doorbell camera, had eyes that looked familiar. This isn't a rumor cooked up online. This isn't an anonymous post with a blurry screenshot. This came directly from the man himself, standing outside his own damaged house, talking to reporter after reporter the very same night. His name is Carlos Palazuelos. For about 18 hours in February, his name was the most searched term in the country. Then it vanished, buried under every new theory that came after it. One name after another took its place, and Carlos got left behind, still waiting for the one thing he's asked for since day one. Anything that clears his name for good. The FBI's own director said, that same night, that investigators were looking at more than one person, his words, not a guess from the outside. Carlos was one name on that list. 4 months later, almost nobody remembers he was ever mentioned at all. Stick with us, because this is the story everyone else moved past too quickly. We're going back to the night the country forgot. Every detail here comes from named, on-record sources, outlets like Fox News, Newsweek, and NBC News. Nothing here is guesswork, and nothing here is speculation wearing the costume of fact. This is Brian Records. If you're just catching up, here's what you need to know before any of it makes sense. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She's the mother of Today's Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, and until this January, she was simply a grandmother living a quiet life outside Tucson. On the night of Saturday, January 31st, she had dinner at her daughter Annie's house. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her home a little before 10 that evening. She walked inside. The garage door closed behind her. That was the last confirmed sighting anyone has of her. By morning, she was gone. She missed her usual church service. Her family reported her missing the next day, and from there, the case turned into one of the strangest disappearances this country has watched unfold in real time. There was blood on her porch, later confirmed to be hers. There was a doorbell camera, deliberately disconnected. The device kept recording motion afterward, but because there was no active cloud subscription tied to it, investigators believed that footage was gone for good, possibly the single most important piece of evidence in the whole case, lost to a billing technicality. Then came the ransom letters. At least 3 news organizations received notes claiming responsibility, each with demands and deadlines attached. One deadline passed on a Thursday. Another passed the following Monday night. Nobody could say for certain if any of it was genuine. To make things messier, a man in California was separately arrested for mailing his own fake ransom note, adding one more layer of confusion to a case that already had very little solid ground to stand on. Tip lines were flooded, nearly 18,000 calls in the first 2 weeks, with more than 4,000 arriving in a single day after the footage went public. Hundreds of investigators were assigned to the case. Meanwhile, medication Nancy needed daily, along with equipment tied to her heart condition, sat untouched inside her empty home. For more than a week, investigators had almost nothing physical to work with beyond a few drops of blood. Then, on Tuesday, February 10th, the entire case shifted in a single afternoon. FBI Director Kash Patel released video and still images pulled from Nancy's own doorbell camera, footage everyone thought was unrecoverable. Investigators had worked with a camera company to dig up leftover data sitting on back-end servers, and what came back showed a masked figure walking up to the front door, a backpack, gloves, a holster handgun. The person's head stayed tilted down the entire time, almost as if they already knew exactly where that camera was pointed. At one point, the figure reached down, grabbed a few plants from Nancy's own yard, and held them up directly in front of the lens, blocking the view. It was the first real break the public had seen in over a week. Savannah Guthrie posted the images herself within the hour. She wrote that somebody out there had to recognize this person, that her family still believed her mother was alive, and she asked whoever it was to please bring her home. That same night, Director Patel went on television and said something that deserves far more attention than it's gotten since. Investigators weren't chasing a single lead. They were actively working through multiple persons of interest at the same time. That detail matters more than people realize, because it means whatever happened a few hours later didn't come out of nowhere. Carlos Palazuelos wasn't randomly picked out of thin air based on one grainy photo. He was a name tied to a tip that was already sitting on a list the FBI's own director confirmed existed that very night. That same evening, while the footage spread across every channel in the country, deputies pulled over a gray SUV on a road near Rio Rico, Arizona, a small town about 60 miles south of Tucson, close to the border, home to roughly 20,000 people. His wife was driving. Carlos was in the passenger seat. Within the hour, the sheriff's department released a short statement. A subject had been detained in connection with the investigation. That single line set off one of the most chaotic nights the case has produced. Reporters raced toward Rio Rico from every direction, chasing a story that, just hours earlier, had been about plants and a ski mask, and was now suddenly about a real name, a real address, and a real family caught in the middle of it. Agents obtained a court-authorized warrant for a home in Rio Rico that night. Witnesses described a heavy police presence outside. Both the front door and the garage door were broken open to get inside. A family that had done nothing wrong watched federal agents search through their entire house in the middle of the night. Inside that home was Josefina, Carlos's mother-in-law. Before her son-in-law was even released, she stood in front of cameras and gave reporters his full name. She told them he had nothing to do with what happened to Nancy Guthrie. She called him a good person, no criminal record, no history of trouble. She said investigators had shown her the doorbell footage and asked her to compare the clothing in it to anything Carlos owned. Her answer was simple: it didn't match. He doesn't own anything like that, she said. But she also said something else that night, something that would follow Carlos for weeks afterward. She told reporters that investigators had shown her a picture from that footage and specifically pointed to the eyes. And according to Carlos, that single detail is what led directly to everything that happened to him next. By 1 a.m, the search wrapped up. Investigators left. Carlos Palazuelos was released without a single charge filed against him. What came next is where this stops being a story about police procedure and starts being a story about a person. Carlos went home to a house with a broken front door and a broken garage door. Reporters were already waiting. He gave at least 3 separate interviews that same early morning, standing outside the home federal agents had just torn through. He explained, in his own words, exactly what he understood about why any of this happened to him. Agents had shown his mother-in-law a photo of someone in a mask, and told her the eyes looked similar to his. Sit with that for a second. A man is telling reporters on camera that the entire reason he ended up in the back of a patrol car that night came down to a partial glimpse of 2 eyes through a ski mask, caught on a doorbell camera, in the dark. He also described what the questioning actually involved. Not an interrogation about a kidnapping, just basic identifying details. His name, his birth date, his social security number, nothing more complicated than that. When reporters asked whether he'd ever been to Nancy's house, his answer was honest enough that it should have closed this chapter right then and there. He said it was possible, he didn't know for certain, because he works as a delivery driver across the Tucson area, and it's entirely realistic that at some point he dropped a package on her porch, the same way he's dropped packages on thousands of other porches. He said he'd never heard her name before that night. Defense attorney Ben Taylor spoke publicly about the legal side of what happened, and he raised a point that rarely makes it into headlines like this one. Police are allowed to stop someone if they have reasonable suspicion, and that part of the encounter was legally sound. But anyone in that position also has rights that most people don't fully understand in the moment. The right to decline a search, the right to ask for a lawyer before answering anything. Taylor's advice for situations like this is simple: state that you're innocent, ask for legal representation, and stop talking. Carlos didn't do that. He answered every question they asked. He described it himself afterward. Investigators wanted to know where he'd been, what his work schedule looked like that week, and he told them everything voluntarily, believing full cooperation was the fastest way out of a situation he didn't understand. Looking back, Taylor's comments almost read like a quiet warning about exactly what happened to Carlos. A completely innocent person can still end up nervous, talkative, and detained for hours, simply because they don't realize they're allowed to stop. Carlos also described what happened to his car during the search. Investigators went through it thoroughly before eventually returning it to him. No drugs. No weapons. Nothing at all connecting that vehicle, or him, to Nancy's disappearance. Just hours of his life gone, and a car that came back exactly the way it left. He told one outlet, through a Spanish-language interview, how the whole experience felt from the inside, like he was being taken against his will, with no explanation given. In comments picked up by multiple news organizations, he said something that should concern anyone who cares about due process, that he was held for hours before anyone informed him of his rights. And then, standing outside his own torn-apart house, he said the line that ended up defining the entire night. He hoped police would find the real suspect, because he wasn't it, and he wanted them to do their job so his name could finally be cleared. This is where we need to slow down, because this is the part almost nobody talks about anymore, and it's the part that should bother you the most. Carlos Palazuelos didn't disappear after that one chaotic night. He kept trying to clear his name, because it seemed like nobody else was going to do it for him. About a week later, he sat down for an exclusive interview alongside his attorney, a man named Jesse Showalter. What he described in that conversation is genuinely difficult to hear. He said that ever since that night, people had been taking photos of him and his family, following them around town. At one point, while he and his wife were out making delivery runs, they noticed a truck trailing them home. The same truck showed up again the next morning. He said it had become genuinely frightening, not just for him, but for his wife and his kids too. Think about what that actually means for a working family. Carlos still had bills to pay and routes to run, all while strangers were photographing him on the very streets he uses to make a living. His wife, who was simply driving that night, was now also being followed. His children were living in a house with a broken garage door, in a town where everyone had seen their father's face connected to a national kidnapping case, with no official statement anywhere saying he had nothing to do with it. His attorney had one simple specific request for the sheriff's department: come out publicly and say that Carlos Palazuelos had nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. That request was never granted, not that week, not in the months that followed. As far as any public record shows, that statement never came. He was never charged. He was never officially named a suspect or a person of interest in any press release. But he was also never formally cleared, not in writing, not on camera, not anywhere official. He was left in about the worst position a person can occupy, not guilty of anything, but never quite innocent either, at least not according to anyone with the authority to say so. There's one more detail worth untangling here, because it's caused real confusion even among people who followed this case closely. Two separate SUVs got tied to this investigation around the same general time frame. One was the gray SUV Carlos and his wife were driving when they were pulled over. The other was an entirely unrelated blue SUV that investigators later removed from Nancy's own garage for examination. Two different vehicles, two different locations, two completely separate threads, and yet online discussion has occasionally blurred them together, as if one explains the other. It doesn't. Mixing them up only makes an already complicated story harder to follow. That kind of mix-up is exactly why timelines matter so much in cases like this one. When a story moves this fast, with this many names, vehicles, and warrants happening within days of each other, small details get scrambled, and scrambled details have a way of turning into theories that don't hold up under any real scrutiny. Let's talk about the eyes, because that detail deserves real scrutiny, not just repetition. Experts who study facial identification will tell you that recognizing someone from a small visible portion of their face, seen through fabric, in low light, on a basic home camera, is one of the least reliable forms of identification that exists. Eyes shift shape slightly with every expression. Lighting changes how they appear. Camera angle distorts anything close to the lens. This isn't an excuse being made on anyone's behalf. It's simply how forensic science describes partial facial recognition. Courts have long treated this kind of identification, especially through something obscuring like a mask, as one of the weakest categories of evidence available, because human perception under those conditions is notoriously unreliable. People misidentify total strangers from clear, well-lit photos all the time. Add a mask, motion blur from a home camera, and the emotional weight of being asked whether an image might connect to your own family, and the odds of a genuinely reliable identification drop even further. There's also a psychological piece that rarely gets discussed. When someone is shown a photo and asked whether it resembles a person they know, that question alone can plant a connection that wasn't there a moment before. Once you're told to look for a resemblance, your mind will often find one, whether or not it's actually real. That doesn't mean Josefina was wrong, and it doesn't mean she was being untruthful. It simply means the entire identification started on shaky ground, and everything built on top of it inherited that same instability. None of this means investigators were wrong to follow up. If a family member looks at a photo and says it reminds her of her own son-in-law, a competent investigator has to chase that thread down. Ignoring it would have been negligent, not cautious. The traffic stop, the warrant, the questioning, all of it was reasonable police work, built on a real named tip that came directly from inside the family itself. What wasn't reasonable is what happened afterward. Once the search turned up nothing, and no charges followed, the system that put Carlos through that night gave him nothing in return. No public statement. No formal clearance. Just silence, while a truck kept following him to his delivery runs. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. As of now, more than 4 months since that January night, nobody has been charged with anything. The doorbell footage remains the clearest physical evidence in the entire case. And somewhere in the sheriff department's files, there's still a phone that was seized from a delivery driver in Rio Rico back in February, with no public word, ever, about what, if anything, was found on it. Maybe there was nothing on it. Maybe that silence is exactly what it looks like, an investigative dead end that never justified its own press release. That's entirely possible, and if it's true, it's one more reason Carlos deserved the statement he asked for. But until somebody says it out loud on the record, the pieces stay exactly where they've been sitting since February. The eyes someone thought looked familiar, the mother-in-law who named her own son-in-law on live television, and the man who stood outside his broken front door in the middle of the night, asking strangers with cameras to please find the real suspect. All of it, still unresolved. There's a version of this story worth naming honestly before we close, because it's the one nobody likes saying out loud. What if Carlos Palazuelos really is exactly what he's always said he is? A delivery driver who happened to have the wrong resemblance at the wrong time, who cooperated fully with everything asked of him, and who lost months of peace to public suspicion over nothing at all. If that's the truth, and there's no public evidence suggesting otherwise, then the ongoing silence isn't just an oversight. It's a small, quiet injustice that nobody in a position of power has bothered to fix for months running, because fixing it would mean admitting publicly that they got it wrong. Let us know what you think. Should the sheriff's department have come forward months ago and formally cleared Carlos Palazuelos' name? And more broadly, how much weight should any partial identification, made under stress and through a mask, really carry in a case like this one? This is Brian Records. We'll see you in the next one.